You've been taught that clarity comes from thinking harder, trying more, forcing your mind to make sense of the world. But what if the very effort to understand is what keeps you from seeing? What if the noise inside your thoughts isn't just stress or habit, but the echo of something older? Something that learned to sound like you so precisely that you stop noticing where it ends and where you begin. Picture a familiar moment. You wake in the early hours, the room still dark, the world still holding its breath. For a brief second, everything feels pure. No story, no identity, just presence. Then the thoughts arrive. Tasks, worries, comparisons. The silence collapses. And beneath it, a quiet instinct asks, why does something crash into me the moment I open my eyes? The ancient teachers warned that the first battlefield is never the outer world. It's perception itself. They describe the Archons not as creatures lurking in shadow, but as distortions of awareness, small bends in perception, subtle enough that most people spend their lives inside them without ever realizing those bends didn't originate within. And yet, the fact that you're here, listening to these words, means you've felt the fracture, the tension between who you truly are and the patterns pressing on your mind. It means you've sensed that a part of your clarity has been living under the influence of something that doesn't belong to you. But beneath that noise, another layer pulses. Not new knowledge, not belief, something remembered. A spark behind your thoughts, older than fear, untouched by imitation. You've met it in moments when the world fell quiet for no reason, and something inside you felt like home. That spark isn't rare. It's your origin, and the Archons cannot copy it. Once you learn to perceive from that inner light instead of the borrowed patterns around you, illusion begins to fracture, not slowly, immediately. Because awareness doesn't fight distortion, it reveals it. And in a moment, we'll go deeper into how these distortions actually enter your perception without your consent. How the quietest patterns shape your reality long before you ever learn the word Archon. This journey isn't about escaping the world, it's about seeing what moves beneath it. And once you see, nothing can unsee it. Most people expect illusion to look dramatic. Flashes of light, strange beings, a veil tearing open. But the deepest illusions arrive quietly. They come dressed as ordinary life, as habits, as thought patterns, so familiar you stop questioning where they came from. The ancient Gnostics never described the Archons as monsters, but as curators of perception, bending awareness a degree at a time until distortion feels like truth. Think of a glass of clear water. Add 1 drop of ink every morning. Too little to notice. Too slow to alarm. But one day, the water is dark. You can't remember when the clarity vanished. That's how the counterfeit world spreads, through inheritance, not invasion. Their first imitation is your inner voice, not the wise one, but the one that spirals, rushes, panics, thoughts that rise too fast, too loud. Emotions that feel borrowed, as if placed rather than born. If you've ever thought, why am I this upset? This isn't like me. That's your perception catching the copy. Attention is the currency of consciousness. Wherever it goes, energy follows. The Archons don't invent fear. They stretch the flicker already inside you, shaping it into a lens you mistake for reality. Perception is never neutral. It's sculpted, tilted, filtered. Something is always quietly deciding what you amplify and what you ignore. Awareness isn't seized by force, but by suggestion. Subtle currents whispering long before you learn to listen. Imagine walking into a crowded room. Before seeing a single face, you feel the atmosphere, tension, calm, unease. Now imagine that same invisible atmosphere shaping your inner world, not because it belongs to you, but because something leaned your perception that way for years. This is why the ancient texts taught that the world of illusion isn't the world itself, it's the interpretation of it. A small bend, repeated 1,000 times, becomes a cage made of conclusions. Nag Hammadi reveals the mechanism. They cast a shadow upon the mind, and the shadow speaks as though it were light. A shadow pretending to be light is simply a perspective pretending to be truth. What breaks the spell is this. Once you know a shadow can speak, you stop believing every voice in your mind. You begin tasting the quality of the thought, not just hearing its volume. You sense which emotions sharpen awareness and which collapse it. This is discernment, the clarity that doesn't fight distortion but exposes it. Archonic influence depends on reflex, on your instant agreement with the noise. But the moment you pause, the loop stutters, the spell weakens, and for one brief, luminous second, you are the one watching the mind instead of being carried by it. That moment is a doorway. And once you step through it, you start to see something even more unsettling. These forces bend perception because they lack the very thing you carry. To understand why these forces cling so tightly to human perception, you have to see what they lack. The ancient Gnostics said the Archons have structure but no source, form but no flame. They mimic creation but cannot create. They echo emotion but cannot feel. They replicate thought but cannot originate truth, and that absence becomes hunger. A world of imitation must feed on whoever carries authentic light. Every time you slip into unconscious reactivity, fear appearing from nowhere, doubt cutting with precision, anger rising sharper than the moment deserves, something is feeding, not on your soul, but on the spark inside your awareness, the spark they cannot generate. Imagine a lantern in a vast, dark valley. Even the faintest flame becomes a beacon. Anything unable to create light on its own will drift toward whatever shines. That's the paradox the mystics warned about. The very fact that you carry divine light makes you visible to forces that do not. But visibility is not vulnerability. Only forgetting turns light into leverage. And hear this clearly. You were never too sensitive or too intense. You were bright in a valley that learned to feed on brightness. The moment you forget the origin of your spark, imitation becomes convincing. Forget you are the observer, and the counterfeit feels real. This is why the ancient texts called them powers that rule by reflection. They hold up distorted versions of your own fear or desire, and hope you mistake the reflection for your own face. They don't need to create darkness. They only need you to doubt your light. But the mechanism they depend on contains their collapse. Imitation cracks the moment you see it. A forged coin only deceives in low light. Brighten the room and every flaw appears. The same happens inwardly. When you look at a reaction instead of obeying it, whether it's a pre-scripted thought or an emotion that feels too exact, you feel it didn't come from your depth. That recognition creates distance. And in that distance, separation begins. You stop being the puppet, you become the witness. And a witness cannot be controlled, only invited to forget. The Gospel of Thomas says, "If the light within you is revealed, all things are revealed." Not poetry, instruction. When you perceive from the spark rather than the shadow, illusion becomes transparent. Manipulation loses shape. Patterns that once grabbed you fall away like threads that no longer hold. Something decisive awakens here. You stop experiencing yourself as someone trapped inside a maze. You recognize yourself as the one who perceives the maze. And once you stand as that witness, the game changes. You're no longer someone they influence. You're someone they can't fully reach. And they know it. Most people spend their lives wrestling with whatever disturbs them, fighting fear, silencing doubt, negotiating with anxiety. But the Gnostics understood something radical. You cannot win a battle inside a hall of mirrors. The more you strike at the reflection, the more it multiplies. The Archons don't gain strength because you are weak. They gain strength because you fight them on their terms, in reaction, in contraction, in forgetting. Imagine standing in a dark corridor. At the far end, a shifting silhouette suggests danger. Your mind fills the gaps, you brace, and then someone lights a single candle. The shape dissolves into nothing but stacked chairs. The threat wasn't defeated, it was revealed. This is the ancient method, not destruction, illumination. Awareness doesn't attack distortion, it burns through it by making the disguise visible. The Archons cannot anchor into a mind that sees clearly, not because they fear you, but because clarity denies them the one thing they depend on, your unconscious agreement. Think of the last time a fear softened the moment you finally turned toward it, or an emotion loosened the moment you stopped resisting. Nothing external changed. You changed vantage points. You stepped out of the imitation that magnified the feeling. This is why the mystics insisted that remembrance, not ritual, not belief, is the doorway. But what exactly are you remembering? A layer of yourself untouched by panic. A layer that stands above the noise like a cliff over a restless ocean, spacious, ancient, unmistakably yours. Every seeker has met this layer at least once. And if you've ever felt a strange calm rise in the middle of your worst moment, that wasn't numbness. That was this layer trying to surface. As the Apocryphon of John says, their power is in the places where awareness has not yet awakened. That one line contains the entire architecture. These forces operate in the unexamined. The habitual loops, the automatic reactions, the moments when attention drifts. So what happens when presence finally enters those places? Something subtle but seismic. Patterns that once controlled you begin to loosen. You notice a thought before it hooks you, a mood before it swallows you. And in that instant of seeing, the spell fractures. You are no longer inside the maze. You're looking at it from above. This is the quiet revolution of Gnostic remembrance. Not dramatic from the outside, but inwardly, it changes everything. Because once you see from the spark instead of the shadow, perception stops being a battlefield. It becomes a vantage point, but seeing the pattern is only the first step. The real transformation begins when you stop merely noticing it and start living from the place beyond it. There comes a moment on every seeker's path when understanding is no longer enough. You've recognized the patterns, sensed the distortions, felt the spark behind your thoughts. But the Archons don't fear what you learn, they fear what you realize. Realization begins the moment awareness becomes your reference point instead of memory. The shift starts quietly. You begin to feel the difference between the voice that rises from the spark and the voice that rises from imitation. The spark never pushes, it opens. It feels like alignment, like walking towards something already yours. The counterfeit always presses, it tightens, it collapses your inner space. One expands, one contracts. And once you feel that contrast, confusion loses its power. Try something simple. Place your attention on your chest, not to change anything, but to sense the atmosphere inside. Is it open or tense, clear or clouded, expansive or collapsing inward? That texture reveals which voice is speaking. The spark expands, the shadow tightens. Every time you follow the expansive voice, even in the smallest choices, the inner lens clears. You stop reacting and begin responding. You stop looping and begin perceiving. And when you shift like this, imitation loses influence, not because you resist it, but because you stop feeding it. This is why the Gnostics said, Liberation is remembering, returning to what you were before distortion wrapped itself around your awareness. When you move from that spark, emotions become signals instead of traps. Thoughts become tools instead of masters. Fear becomes a doorway instead of a cage. And from that quiet, something else becomes unmistakable. The same emotion wearing new disguises, the same thought in a different mask, the same inner pressure appearing the moment your awareness thins. These aren't random. They're signatures of imitation, patterns trying to reclaim your attention. But illusion doesn't collapse from effort. It collapses from insight. The moment a thought appears and something in you whispers, "This isn't me," the architecture trembles, because clarity is a blade, not violent, light. It cuts illusion simply by shining. The counterfeit thrives on confusion, on speed, on assumption. But clarity slows everything down. Fear becomes recognizable. Emotional currents become readable. You feel the exact moment something tries to hook your attention, and instead of being pulled, you watch. And watched illusions cannot hold. The Gospel of Philip says, "Where there is light, darkness ceases." Not the light of the world, the light of awareness. The part of you unmoved, even while the mind stirs, untouched, even while fear arrives. As that inner light strengthens, storms that once drowned you dissolve faster. Noise becomes background static. Reactions drift across you like ripples moving over a deep, unmoving lake, because you were never the storm. You were and are the lake. And as that stillness holds, something even more radical begins. Your entire perception starts reorganizing itself around the spark instead of the shadow. As the counterfeit layers fall away, perception doesn't collapse. It reorganizes, not through effort, but through alignment, like dust settling after years of disturbance. Suddenly, you notice things you've walked past your whole life. The pause between thoughts, the atmosphere of a room before the mind names it, the subtle shift in your chest when something rings true. These aren't accidents. They're the early signals of perception returning to its original clarity. Most people move through life being pulled by memory, by habit, by inherited emotions. But when the spark begins to lead instead of the shadow, something remarkable happens. Reactivity dissolves, space opens, a breath appears. And that breath is not ordinary. It is the mark of regained sovereignty. Because in that breath, you are no longer the one being pushed. You are the one choosing. Stillness doesn't mean silence. It means nothing within you moves without your consent. From this stillness, the world reveals its hidden architecture. You start to feel which conversations carry real intention and which are bait for your attention, what belongs to your essence and what belongs to the echo. Not paranoia, not mysticism, just sovereignty returning to its rightful place. And then comes a moment almost every awakened soul recognizes, a moment rarely named but universally felt. An emotional storm rises, sharp, fast, and suddenly something inside you steps back, not to escape, to watch. The emotion keeps moving, but you're no longer inside it. You're behind it, vast, still, unshaken. That moment is not numbness. It is your spark reclaiming the throne. If this is naming something you've quietly felt for years, let this be your signal. Type "I remember" in the comments. Not as a slogan, as a mark that you're choosing to stay awake inside this world. This is what the ancient texts called the lifting of the veil. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but profoundly real. Because the illusion was never a solid prison, it was a script that required your participation. And the moment you step out of the role written for you, the script loses its power. With this clarity comes a responsibility the mystics considered sacred, remaining awake inside a world that once lulled you to sleep. Because when you remember, your presence naturally disrupts the counterfeit, and that disruption spreads. Awareness is contagious, and nothing unsettles the Archons more. There comes a point in every awakening when the illusion doesn't just weaken, it breaks, not with thunder, not with visions, but with a quiet, immovable realization. I am no longer inside the story. It feels like an atmosphere shift. Thoughts still rise, but they no longer own you. Emotions still move, but they no longer fasten themselves to your center. The world keeps speaking, yet something in you stays untouched, steady, awake. This is the threshold the Gnostics called sacred. The moment the spark stops flickering and begins to inhabit you, the moment you recognize the Archons were never tyrants, only shadows feeding on your forgetting. And now, you are remembering. Illusion collapses not because you destroy it, but because you see it. What once felt like identity reveals itself as residue. Fear loosens without your participation. Doubt thins like smoke in the presence of light. This is liberation, not dramatic, but intimate. The part of you that once reached outward now turns inward toward the light that never left. The part that once panicked now perceives. The storm continues, but you stand above it. And the Archons cannot reach the observer. This is why the ancient texts said, salvation is remembrance, not a reward, not a rescue, a return. A return to the light that was never extinguished. A return to the awareness that was never broken. A return to the origin you carried, even when you forgot. Before this journey closes, take one breath, slow, steady. Let it settle in your chest. Sense the spark behind it, the one that has been speaking to you long before these words found you. Now repeat inwardly, not as something to believe, but as something you are remembering. I see through the shadow. I return to the light. I stand in awareness. Let these words anchor you, not as ritual, as recognition. If something in this journey resonated, if even one line felt like a memory rising rather than an idea learned, leave your mark. And if you want to walk deeper into these hidden teachings, these ancient paths that slip behind the illusion, then like this video and subscribe. This is not an ending. This is your return to where awareness begins.